There are two kinds of caregiving. The kind that gets witnessed, and the kind that happens on a Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching and the light is going flat through the kitchen window, and you are just there, with a cup of tea, and nowhere else to be. For 12 years, my grandmother Ruth had both kinds. My sister Claudia gave her the first. I gave her the second. And for 12 years, I told myself it didn't matter who saw. My name is Vivienne Achebe. I'm 46 years old. I'm an occupational therapist in Savannah, Georgia, and I have spent the better part of my adult life helping other people figure out how to live inside their own bodies after something has taken something from them. I work with people recovering from strokes, from falls, from the slow accumulating losses that come with aging, the losses that don't arrive as a single event but as a long series of small surrenders, a step stool that becomes necessary, a grip that loosens, a name that takes a second too long to arrive. My job is not to reverse what happened. My job is to help people find what's still workable and build from there. That requires patience. It requires showing up the same way every week, calibrated to what the person in front of you actually needs rather than what you've decided they need. It requires the specific discipline of letting someone else's pace be the pace. That work teaches you things. It teaches you that recovery is not linear, and that dignity is not the same as independence, and that the most important thing you can offer someone is often just the fact of being present without an agenda. It teaches you that showing up consistently, without fanfare, is the most underrated form of care there is. It also teaches you to recognize, eventually, when you have been applying that lesson somewhere it was never going to be acknowledged. When the care you are giving has become invisible, not because the person receiving it doesn't see it, but because the person narrating the family story does. This is the story of the Tuesday I found out it had been seen all along. My grandmother, Ruth Achebe, was 81 years old when she died on a Thursday morning in April. She had lived in the same house on Abercorn Street in Savannah for 53 years. The house was a pale yellow craftsman with a porch that listed slightly to the left and a garden that had been Ruth's real project for most of her adult life. Not flowers for show, but vegetables and herbs, things with a purpose. Tomatoes and rosemary and the particular variety of basil she said she had never been able to find anywhere except from seeds her mother had given her in 1971. The kitchen had a copper kettle she'd had since 1974. The pantry had a shelf of tins that never changed position, Earl Grey on the far left, plain black beside it. The rooibos my grandfather Bernard had preferred even though he'd been gone for 19 years, and there was no one left who drank it. She kept it anyway. I never asked her why, and now I wish I had, though I think I know the answer. Some presences you maintain on the shelf because the absence would be worse. The nightstand by her bed had a drawer with a small brass handle that stuck if you pulled it wrong. You had to lift slightly before you pulled, a small trick of the mechanism, the wood having swelled and settled over decades until the drawer had its own specific grammar. She had shown me that once, in the spring of 2013, when her knee was healing from a fall, and she had asked me to reach her reading glasses without making her get up. I remembered the lift and pull. I don't know why it stayed with me. Some things lodge in the body and don't ask permission. Grandma Ruth had two granddaughters. Me, Vivienne, and my sister Claudia, who is 4 years older and lives 12 minutes away from Ruth's house and has always been, in our family's way of telling things, the one who handles things. Claudia is a real estate agent. She has been one for 20 years and she is very good at it. She is good at projection, at making a room feel larger than it is, at presenting the best version of a space to people who need to believe in it, at shaping a narrative around an object so that the person receiving the story takes it as the truth of the thing. I don't say that unkindly. It is a genuine skill, and it has served her well. It just meant that certain things in our family were always framed the way Claudia framed them, and the rest of us adjusted to fit the frame without quite realizing we were doing it. The family narrative over the years went like this. Claudia was close to Grandma Ruth. Claudia was the one who showed up. Claudia drove Ruth to her cardiologist and her podiatrist and the eye doctor and the specialist in Pooler, who was the only one Ruth trusted with her hearing aids. Claudia handled the paperwork when Ruth's hip required surgery in the fall of 2019. She organized the Thanksgivings and the Easter lunches and the birthday dinners in July. She made sure the cousins sent cards and managed the small domestic administration of an elderly woman living alone, which is more than it sounds when the woman in question has strong opinions about how things should be done and is not interested in having them explained to her. Claudia did all of these things. They were real. I am not interested in taking them away from her. What Claudia did not mention, in any of these tellings, was that I was also at Grandma's. Had been for 11 years. Just not on Thursdays.
Tuesday was mine.
Every Tuesday, without exception, from February 2013 until the third Tuesday in April of this year, when Ruth could no longer come to the kitchen, and I sat beside her bed with the Earl Grey steeping on the nightstand instead of on the kitchen table. I counted 146 Tuesdays and then I stopped counting, because counting had started to feel like the wrong relationship to have with something that was never supposed to be a transaction. The ritual was simple. I drove over from the clinic after my last patient, usually somewhere between 4:30 and 5, depending on how the afternoon had run. I stopped at the shop on Bull Street and picked up the Earl Grey she liked, the one in the dark green tin with gold lettering that cost $11.40 a box and was not available at any of the grocery stores near her house. I let myself in through the side door, which she left unlocked on Tuesdays once I had started coming regularly, and she had realized there was no point in making me ring the bell when she was expecting me. I made 2 cups in the copper kettle on the stove because she liked the sound of a kettle more than a microwave, and I sat down across from her at the kitchen table. We talked. Not always about anything that would make a good story later. More often about the neighbors, about the Henderson family's dog that kept finding its way into Ruth's garden with what she described as professional-grade intentions toward the tomato plants, about the news, about whatever she had read that week. Sometimes she told me about my grandfather Bernard, the same 3 stories in rotation, with the kind of seasonal regularity that I had come to understand was not forgetfulness, but something closer to the need to say them, to make them real again in the saying. I listened each time as if they were new. The fish he'd caught that was larger than common sense. The trip they took to Hilton Head in 1987 that went wrong in 3 specific and increasingly funny ways. The suit he'd worn to their first real dinner out together that was the wrong color blue for the restaurant and exactly the right color blue for him. I knew these stories the way I know the layout of certain rooms, from the inside, by feel. I did not tell Claudia about the Tuesdays. For a long time I told myself it was because I didn't want to seem like I was keeping score. But that was a comfortable version of the reason. The actual reason, when I am honest with myself, was more complicated and less flattering. I was afraid that if Claudia knew about the Tuesdays, she would find a way to fold them into her version of things. I had watched her do this my entire life, absorb information about other people's contributions and reframe them until they became context for her own centrality, rather than facts standing on their own.
I didn't want the Tuesdays processed that way.
The Tuesdays were the one part of my relationship with Grandma Ruth that belonged only to the 2 of us, that existed outside of Claudia's framing entirely, and I was protecting that the way you protect the things you can't afford to have taken from you. Ruth kept them quiet too. Not her nature to advertise. She received care the way she received most things, with gratitude expressed sideways, in the specific and particular language of small gestures. The Earl Grey tin left on the counter on Tuesday mornings instead of returned to the shelf, so it was ready when I arrived. The call she made to me and not to Claudia when her knee swelled badly in the fall of 2021, and she wasn't sure if she needed the doctor. The way she said, one afternoon in 2022, sitting across from me with both hands around her cup and the light coming low and sideways through the kitchen window, that she was glad I had a job that meant I understood slowness. I didn't fully understand what she meant. I held it anyway. There are things people say that you don't understand until much later, and the not understanding doesn't make them less true. Claudia had always needed to be first. I say that as an observation, not a judgment, the accumulated weight of 42 years of small examples that adds up to a pattern whether you want it to or not. First to drive, first to graduate, first to be the granddaughter who handled things. She had arranged that last position for herself so gradually and so completely that the family had stopped registering it as an arrangement. It simply became true, the way a story becomes true when nobody disputes it long enough. I don't think she was calculating. People who need to be first rarely are. It's almost never cynicism. It's almost always old fear wearing the clothes of capability, moving so fast the fear stays ahead of its own shadow. Our father left when she was 8, and I was 4. I barely remember him. I have a handful of impressions and then nothing, and mostly I carry his absence as an abstraction rather than a wound. A room I don't know the furniture of because I was too young when the door closed to form the memory. But Claudia had 4 more years of him. She had the before, and then the removal of the before, which is a different and harder grief than never having had it at all. I think she had spent the years since filling that specific vacancy with usefulness and visibility, with being the person other people oriented toward, the person who kept the family's shape intact through sheer force of presence, the person you called when something needed handling. Grandma Ruth was the last and most important recipient of that effort. Ruth accepted it with love because she did love Claudia, because the love was real between them, because the drives to appointments and the organized Thanksgivings were received with genuine gratitude. But there is a difference between loving someone and being the person they needed on a Tuesday. I don't think Claudia had ever needed to notice that distinction because I had always been filling the other side of it. Ruth died at 7:14 in the morning on a Thursday in April. I had been at the house the night before. I sat in the chair beside her bed from 9 o'clock until a little past midnight, watching her sleep with the particular attention you give someone when you understand you are counting the last of something, though you don't know the exact count. I drove home. I slept in pieces. The call came at 7:31. Claudia arrived at 9. By 10 she was on the phone with the funeral home, her voice efficient and precise, moving through the checklist with the fluency of someone who had thought about this moment and prepared for it. By 11 she had a draft obituary open on her laptop. By the time the extended family began arriving that afternoon, she had a folder with tabbed sections, logistics for the service, financial contacts, the list of notifications. She passed it to our cousin Marcus to review, and the gesture was both generous and territorial, both of which were completely characteristic. I sat in the kitchen with my Aunt Delphine, who is Ruth's youngest sister and who has never needed a room to be about her, which I have always found restful. We drank coffee from Ruth's pot, the one with the slightly loose lid you had to hold while you poured, and we talked about Ruth the way I think she would have wanted to be talked about, specifically with attention to what she had actually liked and found funny and found absurd, rather than the version of her that makes a clean tribute. The roses comment, that a person who grew roses for show had missed the whole point of roses. The laugh she had. The particular sound she made when something on the news struck her as completely ridiculous. Delphine said Ruth was one of the last people she knew who said exactly what she meant. I said yes. That was right. The funeral was 6 days later. The reception at the house on Abercorn Street, which was Ruth's preference, and even Claudia knew enough to honor it. The catering came from a restaurant Ruth had found acceptable but not good, which Claudia said was the appropriate register for the occasion, and I made the decision to let that go. Some arguments are available and simply not worth having. Claudia's eulogy ran 18 minutes. I counted because my hands needed something to do, and counting was preferable to feeling. She used the word I 14 times in the first 3 pages. I counted that too, eventually, because the noticing had become too loud to ignore, and turning it into a number gave it somewhere to live other than in my chest. She talked about the drives to appointments, the Thanksgivings, the birthday cards every year, never missed, what she had given, what she had done. It was all true. Every word of it was accurate. It was the kind of truth that names every real thing, and then stops precisely at the border of the other real things, the way you can describe a room correctly by naming only half the furniture. When the guests had thinned and the last coats were being gathered, Claudia found me near the kitchen doorway. She was holding Grandma Ruth's phone in a navy blue case, the large text accessibility setting because Ruth's eyes had been giving her trouble since 2020. Clear it out, would you? Claudia said. You have time for that. She handed me the phone and turned to speak to someone before I had said a word. I took it. I sat down at the kitchen table. It was close to 8 in the evening. The copper kettle was on the stove where someone had moved it. The small lamp over the sink was on, and the light was the washed-out kind that comes at the end of a day that has held too much. From the next room, I could hear my Aunt Delphine's sealing containers, the clean, steady snap of Tupperware lids, one after another, the rhythm of putting things away. I started with the contacts, then the photographs. There were 211 photographs. I went through them carefully because some of them deserved to be looked at before they were deleted. 43 contained Claudia or had been taken during something Claudia had organized. 61 were of me, or of things I had brought, or moments Ruth had captured without mentioning it to me. The basil plant on the windowsill that I had given her in 2020, the teacup I always used, a Tuesday afternoon light through the kitchen window that she had apparently found worth keeping. I sat with the number 61 for a moment. Then I got to the voice memos. 23 recordings. The first was from 2021, 34 seconds, a bird outside the window whose sound Ruth had found beautiful enough to preserve. The next few were practical. Medication reminders, a grocery list spoken aloud, a phone number read into the recorder twice, so she wouldn't misplace it. The voice of a practical woman making practical use of a device. Then, around the 7th recording, from a Sunday evening in November 2022, something shifted in register. Ruth's voice said, "I have been thinking about what it means to receive something from a person. Not a gift, not something bought and wrapped. Just presence. Just the fact of a person being there and not somewhere more important than you. I've been trying to think of a word for it, and I cannot find one, which makes me think it is one of the things that does not have a name in English, because English is not very good at naming what does not cost money." I stopped the recording. I sat still. The Tupperware sounds had gone quiet. The lamp over the sink put its light on the copper kettle. Outside on Abercorn Street a car went past, and the sound faded. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 8:17. I pressed play on recording 8. I listened to all of them from there. Some ran less than a minute. Some ran to 4 or 5 minutes. They were not a formal diary, not addressed to anyone, not dated in her voice, not structured. They were the record of a woman thinking out loud into a device she trusted not to repeat her, or judge her, or fold what she said into someone else's story. The true things. The things too specific and too real to survive the editing that happens the moment another person is listening. Recording 13, a Wednesday afternoon. She talked about the garden, whether the basil would survive October, whether she should cut it back or let it run. She decided to let it run. Then she said, "There are things you have to let go their own way, and trust them." I don't know if she meant the basil. Recording 16, a Thursday in January. Ruth's voice said, "Claudia came today. She reorganized the pantry. I had a system, and now the system is different, and I did not say anything because she was doing it from love, I know that. I do wish people would ask before they change a system that has been working for 30 years. A pause. Then, "She means well." Another pause. Then the recording ended on a silence I recognized, the silence of someone who has said the charitable thing and left the less charitable thing to stand in the air unsaid. Recording 18. A Tuesday in February. Her voice said, "Vivienne was here today. She brought the Earl Grey, the good kind from Bull Street. We talked about the news and the Henderson's dog, and she didn't try to fix anything or move anything. She just sat and listened, and we had tea, and I find myself thinking afterward that there is a kind of visiting that replenishes you and a kind that depletes you, and I have always known the difference. I just could not have said it out loud to anyone without it becoming a complaint, and it isn't a complaint, it's just the truth of it." I put the phone down on the table. I sat with that one for a long moment. From the other room came nothing. Delphine had finished with the Tupperware, and it seemed she had gone into the front of the house, or stepped outside, and the kitchen was fully quiet now in a way it had not been all evening. It was the kind of quiet that has weight to it. The kind you don't break for small reasons. I was sitting in my grandmother's kitchen at 8:20 on a Thursday night after her funeral reception, and I understood for the first time, sitting there with the phone in my lap and the copper kettle behind me on the stove, that the last 11 years had not been invisible in the way I had believed they were invisible. They had been invisible to Claudia. They had been invisible to the aunts and the cousins and the family narrative and the eulogy and the 14 Is in the first 3 pages. But they had not been invisible to Ruth. Ruth had been receiving them clearly, keeping them carefully, recording them in the one place she knew she could be honest about what she needed and what she had received, and what the difference cost her. She had known I was there. Not in the abstract way that you know someone cares about you. In the specific, dated, Tuesday by Tuesday way that only accumulates if you have been paying attention for a long time. I did not know what to do with that. I sat there and held the phone, and I did not know for probably 3 full minutes what a person does when they find out that the thing they had decided didn't matter. The witnessing, the acknowledgement, the knowing had been happening all along in the only place that actually counted, which was the mind of the person being cared for. My hands were not entirely steady. I picked the phone back up. Recording 19.
A Tuesday in March.
Her voice was slightly thinner than February. Not dramatically, but I heard it, the clinical ear catching the small effortfulness in the breath before a longer sentence. She said, "Vivienne was here again today. She brought the good tea." I told her about the time Bernard caught the fish that was larger than common sense, and she laughed the way she laughs, which is the same laugh she had when she was small, and I think it will be the same laugh she has when she is old, if I know her at all. I am glad she comes every week. I think she knows how glad I am. I hope she knows. The recording ended. I did not move. The kitchen was quiet in the specific way that kitchens are quiet when the people who belonged in them are gone, and you are the last one at the table. Copper kettle on the stove. Earl Grey tin on the left-hand shelf. Lamp over the sink. I was holding my grandmother's phone in both hands, and what I was feeling was not grief. Grief was already there, had been there all week, present the way weather is present, just part of the air. This was something alongside it. Something more like being found. Like hearing your own name spoken correctly after a long time of hearing it approximated, and realizing you had adjusted so completely to the approximate version that you had almost forgotten the correct one. I looked at the clock. 8:21. 4 minutes since I pressed play on recording 19. 11 years. 4 minutes. Then Claudia came back into the kitchen. She came through the door already in motion, phone in hand, mid-thought about the estate, the timeline, the house, the keys. She opened the refrigerator and looked at its contents and closed it without taking anything, which was what she did when her hands needed somewhere to be while she was thinking about something else. I said, "I found voice memos on Grandma's phone." She glanced over and held up the hold-on finger. Finished her call. Set the phone on the counter.
Voice memos, she said.
Anything for the estate?
No.
Nothing like that. She recorded herself. Her thoughts. About her days and the people who came to see her. Claudia leaned against the counter. Already moving past it. Anything worth keeping? There's one, I said. From a Tuesday in March. Something in how I said it made her put her phone down. About 6 weeks before she died. Claudia looked at me. I looked at her. I pressed play. Ruth's voice came into the kitchen thin and entirely herself. Vivienne was here again today. She brought the good tea. I told her about the time Bernard caught the fish that was larger than common sense, and she laughed the way she laughs, which is the same laugh she had when she was small, and I think it will be the same laugh she has when she is old, if I know her at all. I am glad. She comes every week. I think she knows how glad I am. I hope she knows. The recording ended. The kitchen was very quiet after it. Claudia was standing at the counter with her hands flat on the surface on either side of her phone. She was looking at the copper kettle on the stove. Not at me. Her face was doing something I had not seen it do in 42 years, something that hadn't finished becoming an expression yet. Something that had to rearrange itself before it could be read. She said, "You went every Tuesday." Yes. For how long? 11 years. She picked up her phone, set it back down. Outside a car pulled from the curb and the sound diminished down Abercorn Street and came back to quiet. "I didn't know that," she said. "I know you didn't." She looked at the phone, the recording over. Working through something. "She never said anything to me about it," she said. "I thought about the tin on the counter on Tuesday mornings. The kettle already filled. The key she had pressed into my hand in 2014 without being asked. The nightstand drawer with the brass handle. Lift and pull." Ruth's voice on a March recording saying I hope she knows, and the thought arriving clearly. She knew I would be in the kitchen at the end. She had always known which of us would end up at the table doing the quiet work when everyone else had gone home. She had left the recording where I would find it. Not as a message to Claudia. As a message to me. "You were here. I knew you were here. I hope you know." She mentioned it, I said. "Just not to you." Claudia stood there a moment longer. Then she picked up her bag and said she needed to get home, and she left. I listened to the last 4 recordings alone. Then I turned off the lamp and locked the side door and drove home through Savannah on a Thursday night with the azaleas going in the squares and the mockingbirds doing their nighttime cataloging in the live oaks. I parked in front of my house and sat for a while. The porch light was on. The street was quiet. I had spent 11 years, somewhere in the back of my mind, imagining what this would feel like. Not this specific form of it. I hadn't known about the recordings, hadn't planned for any of this. But the underlying thing, the moment when it was acknowledged, when the record was corrected, when Claudia knew, it didn't feel the way I had imagined. There was no sharp satisfaction, no settled account, no clean close. What I felt was quieter, more specific, like something had been returned to me that I hadn't known was missing. Not vindication, not justice, not Claudia's acknowledgement. Just accuracy. Just the small true fact of having been known by the person whose knowing mattered, and now having proof I could hold in my hands. I went inside. I made tea. Not the Earl Grey. I had brought the last tin home from Ruth's kitchen, and I set it on my own left-hand shelf and stood looking at it for a moment before I made something else, because some things you keep and don't open right away, because the right time hasn't come yet. I sat at my kitchen table with a plain cup and Ruth's phone in front of me and listened to all 23 recordings straight through from the beginning. 41 minutes. Somewhere near recording 20, I started to cry. Not the grief I had been carrying all week, which was already present and familiar. Something alongside it, the release that comes when a part of you that has been holding something tightly for a very long time finally receives word that it can set the thing down. Not because the holding was wrong, because it's over. Because you made it through, and you can feel for the first time how much the thing weighed. I set down the phone. I finished my tea. I thought about Claudia at the counter with her hands flat on the surface and her face rearranging itself. I did not call her. There was nothing to call about. Whatever she was going to do with what she'd heard, whatever it was going to ask of her, whatever it was going to require her to revise in the story she had been telling about our family for decades, that was her work. Not mine. I had done mine. 146 Tuesdays, without a score to settle, without an audience, without my name in any version of the story told at the table with the good dishes. My Aunt Delphine called the next morning. She had heard some of it from the next room. Not all, but enough. She said, "I want you to know that your grandmother talked to me about your Tuesdays. Not to Claudia. Not to anyone else in the family. Just to me, a few times over the last couple of years. She said you were the one who understood how to be in a room with her." I sat at the kitchen table in the morning light. She was a smart woman, Delphine said. She was. She knew who came. She did, I said. She knew. The Earl Grey tin is on the left-hand shelf in my kitchen now. In the same position it always occupied in Ruth's. I don't open it every week. Some Tuesdays I do, and I make a cup and drink it at the table before work, and the morning is quiet, and the light is whatever the light is, and I think about things that don't need to be written down. The copper kettle is on my stove too. It holds water the way a copper kettle always holds water. Sometimes I use it for the sound of it because the sound is the right sound for an early morning, and that is reason enough. I have not spoken to Claudia since the kitchen on Abercorn Street. Not because I am waiting for something from her. Not because I am managing a punishment. I have simply stopped waiting, and the stopping feels like nothing dramatic, like a door that was kept open out of habit finally allowed to close. If she wants to find me, she knows where I am. I have always been exactly where I said I was. Here is what I want to say to you if you have ever carried something like this. The invisible labor is still labor. The fact that no one witnessed it doesn't reduce what it cost you. The fact that you didn't announce it doesn't make it not count. It counted. It happened. It was real on every one of those days, and it is still real now. You don't need a eulogy to have been essential. You don't need your name said from a podium to have been the one who kept showing up. The most important things in a relationship often happen in the ordinary time, not at the table with the guests and the good dishes, not in the version of the story that gets told afterward. In the time that doesn't photograph well, the time that looks like nothing from the outside and holds everything from inside it. The person who needed you almost always knew. They couldn't always say it in the rooms where it would have mattered. But they said it somewhere, into a phone, in the quiet of an afternoon, into the space they kept for the truest things. They said your name the way they said it when they were alone and honest with themselves. What gets witnessed and what gets done are not the same list. They're both real. Only one of them is yours to carry forward. You are allowed to know what you did. You don't need anyone to hand that knowledge to you. It is yours already. It was always yours. You carried it for years without acknowledgement, and it was real the entire time. Every week of it, every cup of tea, every ordinary afternoon you chose to be somewhere because someone needed you there, and the need was enough. Some things get named in public and remembered in public. Some things get done and remembered where they actually matter, in the body of the person who did them, in the memory of the person who received them, in 23 voice recordings on a phone in a nightstand drawer with a brass handle that sticks unless you know the trick of it. Lift and pull. I am 46 years old, and I am still learning that my time matters as much as anyone else's. Still learning that the work I do quietly, in the rooms where no one is keeping score, is not diminished by the absence of an audience. The lesson is not one you arrive at and file away. It comes back and visits. You let it in. You sit with it. It leaves something behind each time. If you have been showing up on Tuesdays quietly for years for someone who needed you and knew you were there and couldn't always say so in the rooms that counted, I want you to sit with one question before you close this. Who knows you were there?